He wasn't supposed to find a child that day. He was supposed to find bodies, vengeance, justice, Comanche style. The year was 1847, and in Texas, justice usually meant blood. Swift Eagle rode his stallion through the thick, humid woods, the air heavy with the smell of pine and coming rain. He was 28 winters old, a warrior carved from the very land he patrolled, with eyes that missed nothing. And what his eyes were searching for were the tracks of the raiders who had hit a nearby settlement. Not because he cared for the white settlers. He didn't. He cared about the balance. And these raiders, from the sound of it, were a different kind of evil. They killed for sport, not for survival. He dismounted, his feet making no sound on the damp earth. The silence in this part of the forest was wrong. It was a dead silence, the kind that comes after a storm of violence has passed through, leaving nothing but echoes. He moved through a thicket of tangled mesquite, his hand resting on the smooth, worn handle of his tomahawk. He was ready for a fight. He was expecting an ambush. What he found was a little girl. She was huddled at the base of a massive ancient oak tree, her tiny frame shaking with silent sobs. Her hair was the color of spun gold, a shocking splash of light in the forest gloom. Her dress was ripped and stained with dirt and something dark, something that looked like dried blood. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. He froze. A warrior's instinct is to see a threat, a trap. A crying child could be bait. But then she looked up, and his warrior's heart stuttered. Her eyes were the color of a summer sky just before a storm, huge and filled with a terror so profound it felt ancient. She wasn't a trap. She was a survivor. She was the only thing left. He took a slow step forward, and she flinched, pressing herself so hard against the tree trunk. It was a miracle she didn't disappear into the bark. He could see the story of the last 2 days written on her small body, the scratches on her arms, the gash on her forehead, the hollow look in her eyes that spoke of hunger and a loneliness no child should ever know. He saw all of that, but there was something else. Clutched in her tiny, dirty fist, so tight her knuckles were white, was a silver locket. It swung gently on its chain, catching a stray beam of sunlight that pierced the canopy. It was ornate, too fancy for a simple settler's child. And it was still polished, which meant it hadn't been in the dirt for long. It meant it was important. He crouched down, making himself smaller, less of a threat. He knew a few words of the white man's tongue, learned from traders and the occasional captive. "Easy, little one," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I will not harm you." She just stared, her crying hitched into tiny, fearful gasps. He tried again, using a name his own mother had called him. "What is your name, little star?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then a whisper so faint he almost missed it. "Lily," she said. "Lily May." He repeated the name. It felt foreign on his tongue. He looked from her terrified blue eyes to the silver locket clutched in her hand. There was a story here, a mystery far deeper than a simple raid. He felt a pull, a protective instinct so fierce it was like a physical blow. He had come seeking the ghosts of a massacre. Instead, he found a daughter, and he knew with a certainty that shook him to his core that keeping her would be more dangerous than any battle he had ever fought. He could see the faint tracks around the area, the signs of a struggle. But something was off. The tracks weren't from shod horses, not the kind soldiers rode. And they weren't the tracks of moccasins either. They were different, unsettling. The men who did this weren't soldiers, and they weren't warriors. They were something else entirely. He scooped her up into his arms. She was lighter than a bundle of sticks. As he settled her against his chest, her tiny hand uncurled, just enough for him to see the locket properly. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. Engraved on its surface wasn't a flower or a name. It was a symbol, a coiled serpent eating its own tail, with a single black star in the center. He'd never seen a mark like it before. It felt wrong. It felt like a warning. "Gone," she had whispered when he asked about her family. "The bad men came." But who were the bad men? He had assumed she meant his own people, or perhaps other tribes. But the symbol on that locket, it didn't belong to any tribe he knew. It didn't belong to the settlers, or the Mexicanos, or the blue-coated soldiers. It felt like it belonged to the shadows themselves. Holding her close, he mounted his horse. Lily May was exhausted, and within minutes she was asleep, her small head resting on his shoulder. But for Swift Eagle, there was no peace. Every shadow in the forest seemed to twist and writhe. He wasn't just bringing home an orphan. He was carrying a secret, a mystery engraved on a silver locket, and he had the chilling feeling that the bad men who had left her behind might just come back to find what they had lost. The ride to his village was a race against a nameless fear. He wasn't just a warrior anymore. He was a father, and a father protects his child, no matter what darkness comes hunting for them. The first person to see him was Grey Wolf, his oldest friend. Grey Wolf's face was a roadmap of battles won and lost, but his eyes were sharp. He saw the bundle in Swift Eagle's arms, and his expression shifted from curiosity to alarm. "My brother," he called out, his voice low. "What is this? A captive?" A captive was a prize, something to be traded or held for ransom. Swift Eagle looked down at the sleeping girl, her golden hair a stark contrast against his dark buckskin. "No," he said, his voice firm. "A daughter." Grey Wolf's eyes widened. He saw the girl's pale skin, her foreign features. "You are mad," he hissed, keeping his voice down as they neared the village. "The elders will never accept this. Spotted Hawk will call for her death before the sun sets." Spotted Hawk. The name hung in the air like a threat. He was a warrior whose heart had been turned to stone by loss. His wife and child had been killed by white settlers years ago, and his grief had curdled into a relentless, burning hatred. He saw every white face as a target, a ghost of the ones who had destroyed his world. To him, Lily May wouldn't be a child. She would be a symbol, a disease. As they entered the circle of teepees, the village fell silent. Women stopped their work. Children paused their games. All eyes were on the golden-haired child in Swift Eagle's arms. He felt their stares like 100 tiny arrows. Then a figure emerged from the largest teepee, his mother, Morning Star. Her face was serene, but her eyes held a storm of questions. "My son," she said, her voice laced with concern, "what have the spirits sent you?" Before he could answer, another voice cut through the air, sharp and cold as a shard of ice. "He brings a viper into our home." It was Spotted Hawk. He strode forward, his muscular frame taut with rage. His eyes weren't on Swift Eagle. They were locked on the sleeping child, and the look in them was one of pure venom. "She is the spawn of our enemies, the ones who burn our villages and slaughter our children. She will bring nothing but a curse upon us." Swift Eagle dismounted, placing himself between Spotted Hawk and the child. "She is a child," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Her family is gone. She was alone." "Then she should have died alone," Spotted Hawk snarled. "It would have been a cleaner death than the one she will bring to us all." He took a step forward, his hand reaching for the knife at his belt. Several other warriors loyal to Spotted Hawk shifted their weight, their faces hard and unforgiving. The village was a tinderbox, and this child was the spark. Swift Eagle knew he had only moments to stop a fire that could consume them all. He held Lily May tighter, her warmth a small anchor in a sea of hatred. Just then, the child stirred. Her blue eyes fluttered open, blinking in the harsh afternoon light. She saw the circle of dark, angry faces staring down at her, and her body went rigid with fear. A tiny whimper escaped her lips. That small, pathetic sound did what Swift Eagle's words could not. It broke the spell of hatred, at least for a moment. It reminded them that this wasn't about politics or war. This was about a terrified orphan child. Morning Star stepped forward, her presence radiating a quiet authority. She placed a hand on Spotted Hawk's arm. "Enough," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. "We are Comanche. We do not make war on children." She turned her gaze to her son, and then to the girl. She reached out and gently touched Lily May's cheek. "The Great Spirit does not work in straight lines," said Spotted Hawk. "Sometimes the path to our future is found in the most unexpected places." Chief Running Bear, the old and wise leader of their band, emerged from his lodge. He looked at the child, then at Swift Eagle, then at the divided faces of his people. His eyes, clouded with age, seemed to see everything. "She will need a name," the chief said, his voice raspy but firm, cutting through the tension. By not ordering the child cast out, he was giving his silent approval. A Comanche name. Swift Eagle felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. "I will call her Little Flower," he said, "for she is small and beautiful, but has survived the harshest winds." "Little Flower," Morning Star repeated, a small smile touching her lips. But Spotted Hawk was not moved. He spat on the ground. "A flower can be poisonous," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I will not call this thing by a Comanche name, and I will be watching. The day she brings ruin upon us, I will be the one to cut the rod out." He turned and stalked away, a handful of his most loyal warriors following him like shadows. The immediate danger had passed, but Swift Eagle knew this was just the beginning. He had won the first battle, but not the war. He now had an enemy within his own camp, an enemy who saw his daughter not as a child, but as a curse waiting to unfold. And as he looked down at Little Flower's frightened face, he wondered if Spotted Hawk might be right. What if she was a curse? What if the serpent on her locket was a sign of the poison she carried within her? 6 months passed. 6 months of walking on eggshells. Little Flower, as she was now known by all but a few, began to heal. The haunted look in her eyes was replaced by a cautious curiosity. She learned a few words of their language, her childish tongue stumbling over the harsh consonants. She played with the other children, her bright golden hair a stark flag in a sea of black. To most of the tribe, she was a novelty, a strange and beautiful addition to their world. To Morning Star, she was a granddaughter. To Swift Eagle, she was his entire world. But to Spotted Hawk and his followers, she was a constant festering wound. They watched her every move. If a hunt went badly, it was because the white child had spooked the spirits. If someone fell ill, it was her foreign presence breeding sickness. Every misfortune was laid at her feet. They never spoke to her, never acknowledged her existence beyond a cold, hateful stare. It was a silent war, fought in the heart of the village. One evening, as Swift Eagle was teaching Little Flower how to fletch a small toy arrow, Gray Wolf came to his teepee. His friend's face was grim. "The scouts have returned," he said, his voice low. "Bluecoats, a full company moving west. They're not just passing through." Swift Eagle felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "What do they want?" "They're building an outpost, a fort, right at the edge of our hunting grounds," Gray Wolf continued. "But that's not all. They're asking questions." He paused, looking at Little Flower, who was now concentrating on tying a feather to her little arrow, oblivious. "They are asking about a child, a white girl with hair like the sun. They carry a drawing of her." The blood drained from Swift Eagle's face. It was her. They were looking for her. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "A captain," Gray Wolf said. "His name is Thorn. They say the girl is his kin, his niece." Swift Eagle's mind reeled. A captain, an uncle, a family. All this time he had believed she was utterly alone, a life for him to save and shape. But she had a past, a world that was now coming to reclaim her, and it was coming with guns and cannons. "What do we do?" Gray Wolf asked. "If they find her here, they will call us kidnappers. They will have the excuse they need to wipe us out." Suddenly, Spotted Hawk's warnings didn't seem like the ravings of a grief-stricken man. They felt like prophecy. The girl was bringing ruin, not by magic or curses, but by the relentless march of her own people. The choice was stark and terrible. He could give her up, send her back to a world she no longer remembered, to a man she didn't know. It would save his people. It would be the logical, strategic thing to do. Or he could fight. He could stand against the United States Army for the sake of one small girl. It was madness. It was suicide. He looked at Little Flower. She had just finished her arrow. She held it up for him to see, her face beaming with pride. In her blue eyes, he didn't see a white child or a curse. He saw his daughter. And the choice was no longer a choice at all. "We prepare for a storm," Swift Eagle said, his voice resonating with a grim finality. But even as he said it, he knew this was a storm they might not survive. The very next day, the crisis deepened. The tribe's medicine woman, Gentle Rain, asked to see him. She was ancient, her face a web of wrinkles, her eyes holding the wisdom of 100 winters. She had been studying the silver locket, the one Little Flower had been found with. "The symbol," she said, holding the locket in her gnarled palm. "The serpent that eats itself. I have seen it before. Long ago." She told him a story, a dark tale from her grandmother's time, about a group of white men who did not follow the white man's God. They were outcasts, worshippers of shadow and chaos, who called themselves the Black Star Covenant. They believed in sacrifice, in blood. They were said to steal children for their dark rituals. They were not settlers. They were monsters who wore human skin. "This is their mark," Gentle Rain whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "If this child carries their mark, she is not just a lost girl. She is either an escapee or bait." A chill, colder than any winter wind, washed over Swift Eagle. The bad men Lily had spoken of. What if they weren't raiders? What if they were this covenant? And Captain Thorne, was he truly her uncle, searching for his lost niece? Or was he something else? A member of the same dark group, coming to retrieve their property. The soldiers were a threat. Spotted Hawk was a threat. But this new revelation was a terror beyond imagining. Little Flower wasn't just caught between two worlds. She was at the center of a vortex, a storm of violence and fanaticism, and he was standing right in the middle of it with her. That night, as the village slept uneasily, Swift Eagle watched his daughter sleep. He finally asked her, his voice gentle, "Little Flower, the locket, who gave it to you?" She mumbled in her sleep, her brow furrowed. "Mama," she whispered. "Mama said, never open it, never. Don't open it, a mother's last warning." With trembling hands, Swift Eagle took the locket. He found the tiny clasp. He knew he shouldn't. He knew he was betraying a promise, but he had to know. He clicked it open. He expected to see a miniature portrait, perhaps of her mother or father, but the locket was empty. Or it seemed empty. He tilted it in the moonlight and saw the faint, almost invisible scratches on the inside of the silver. It wasn't a picture, it was a map. A map. Scratched into the silver, barely visible, was a crude drawing of a river, a distinctively shaped mountain, and a single marked spot. It was a location deep within their territory, a place known as the Valley of Whispering Stones, a sacred and formidable place few Comanche ever dared to enter. Why would a settler's child have a map to a Comanche holy site? It made no sense, unless her family weren't settlers at all. The Bluecoats, led by Captain Thorne, arrived 2 days later. They didn't come in a wave of violence. They came as a single rider, under a flag of truce. The rider was Thorne himself. He was a tall man, his face hard, but his eyes carrying a deep, weary sadness. He stopped his horse just outside the village and asked to speak with the chief. Chief Running Bear agreed, and a tense council was held in the center of the village. Spotted Hawk and his warriors stood nearby, their hands on their weapons, radiating pure hostility. Swift Eagle stood beside his chief, his heart pounding a war drum against his ribs. Little Flower was hidden away in Morningstar's teepee, her presence a secret that felt impossibly heavy. "I am looking for my niece," Thorne said, his voice steady, his Comanche surprisingly good. "Her name is Lily May. She was taken from her family 6 months ago. She has hair of gold and eyes the color of the sky." He held up a charcoal sketch. It was her, unmistakably. "We tracked the raiders responsible here. We know you have her." "We have a child," Chief Running Bear said carefully. "An orphan we found in the forest. We call her Little Flower." "She is no orphan," Thorne said, his voice hardening. "She is my blood. I want her back." "And if we refuse?" Swift Eagle asked, stepping forward. Thorne's sad eyes locked onto his. "Then my 200 men and their big guns will tear this village apart until I find her. I will not lose the last of my family." It was a clear, unambiguous threat. Give her up, or face annihilation. Spotted Hawk smiled, a cruel, triumphant smirk. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment the white girl would bring the Bluecoats' wrath down upon them, proving him right. He wanted the war. He craved it. But then Swift Eagle did something unexpected. He held up the locket. "Did she also carry this?" he asked. Thorne's eyes widened in shock. The hard military mask on his face crumbled, replaced by raw, naked pain. He visibly recoiled, as if Swift Eagle had struck him. "Where did you get that?" he breathed, his voice ragged. "It was clutched in her hand when I found her," Swift Eagle said, watching the captain's reaction closely. This was the test. Was he one of them? "The men who took her," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a venom that matched Spotted Hawk's. "The Black Star Covenant. You have heard of them?" Swift Eagle nodded slowly. The pieces were beginning to click into place, forming a picture more terrifying than he could have imagined. "They are not my people," Thorne said with disgust. "They are a cancer, a cult of vipers who twist faith into an excuse for murder. They took my sister years ago, Lily. Lily is her child. I've been hunting the Covenant for 5 years. I thought I had found their main camp when I found the massacre site. But she was gone. They must have taken her. So the bad men weren't Comanche. They were this cult. And they hadn't killed Lily. They had kidnapped her. But why? And why did her mother give her a map to a sacred Comanche site?" Thorne's story seemed to check out. The pain in his eyes felt real. But a part of Swift Eagle still screamed in protest. This man, no matter his intentions, wanted to take his daughter. "She is happy here," Swift Eagle said, his voice thick with emotion. "She is one of us." "She is a white child living in a world that is about to disappear," Thorne shot back, his frustration boiling over. "I can give her a life, a future. What can you give her? A war you cannot possibly win?" The debate raged, the chief listening patiently. But while the leaders talked, others acted. Under the cover of the tense negotiations, Spotted Hawk slipped away from the village. He wasn't a fool. He had listened to every word. The Bluecoats weren't the only enemy. This Covenant was out there too. And he had a plan. A dark, twisted plan to solve all his problems at once. He would find this Covenant. He would tell them where the girl was. He would lead them right to the village. The cultists, the soldiers, and the girl who started it all. They would all be consumed in a single glorious blaze of destruction. He would let his enemies destroy each other, and he would rise from the ashes. That night, a fragile, temporary truce was declared. Thorne agreed to hold his soldiers back for 2 days to give the Comanche time to consider his offer. But Swift Eagle knew it was a hollow promise. He couldn't give her up. He wouldn't. He went to the medicine woman's teepee, the locket clutched in his hand. He needed to understand the map. "Why would her mother send her there?" he asked Gentle Rain. The old woman looked at the map, then at him. "The Valley of Whispering Stones is a place of power," she said. "A place of refuge. The legends say that long ago, one of our ancestors hid his family there from a great evil. The spirits of the rock are said to confuse and mislead any who enter with a dark heart. Perhaps her mother knew the legends. Perhaps she was trying to send her child to the one place her enemies could not follow. A sanctuary, a last desperate gamble by a dying mother. Swift Eagle knew what he had to do. He couldn't fight the army in this mysterious cult. But he could run. He could take Little Flower to the Valley of Whispering Stones and disappear. He went to her, sleeping soundly in his teepee. He knelt beside her, his heart breaking. "Little Flower," he whispered, waking her gently. "We have to go on a journey, just you and me." She rubbed the sleep from her eyes. "Are the soldiers coming?" she asked, her voice small with fear. "We're going somewhere they can't find us," he promised. "Somewhere safe." He gathered a few supplies, moving like a ghost through the sleeping village. He and Grey Wolf had a quiet, hurried conversation. His friend would stay behind to try and delay Thorne and to watch Spotted Hawk, whose absence had not gone unnoticed. As Swift Eagle led a single horse out of the village, with Little Flower holding tightly to him, he looked back at the home he was leaving behind. He was now an outcast, a fugitive from his own people and from the white world. He was saving his daughter, but he might be damning himself. They rode into the pre-dawn darkness, following the stars towards the mountains on the horizon. He didn't know that at that very moment, Spotted Hawk was meeting with a group of shadowy figures in a hidden canyon miles away. He didn't know that he wasn't just running from Captain Thorne. He was being hunted by the very monsters Lily had escaped from, and he was leading them straight towards the most sacred place his people had ever known. The journey to the Valley of Whispering Stones was a frantic, desperate flight. They rode hard, pushing their horse to its limits, stopping only for brief moments to rest and drink. Swift Eagle's senses were on fire. Every snapped twig, every shadow felt like a threat. He was not just a father protecting his child, he was a warrior in hostile territory, and the enemy could be anywhere. Little Flower was quiet, her small arms wrapped tightly around his waist. She could feel his tension, his fear, and it became her own. She didn't cry or complain. The terrified child he had found in the woods was gone, replaced by a resilient little girl who had learned the hard lessons of survival. She was a true Comanche now, in spirit if not in blood. They reached the foothills of the mountains on the second day. The air grew thinner, cooler. The terrain became treacherous, a maze of rocks and steep canyons. This was the land of spirits, a place where the world of men touched the world of the gods. And according to the map in the locket, it was their only hope for sanctuary. As they navigated a narrow pass, Swift Eagle suddenly reined in his horse. He had heard something, the faint sound of a horse stumbling on loose rock far below them. He dismounted, pulling Little Flower with him, and crept to the edge of the cliff. He peered down. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was them, the Black Star Covenant. There were maybe a dozen of them, dressed in dark, ragged clothing, their faces grim and fanatical. They were skilled trackers following his trail with an unnatural precision, and leading them, pointing out the path, was a figure he recognized instantly. Spotted Hawk. The betrayal was a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Spotted Hawk hadn't just left the village. He had joined the enemy. He had led the wolves to the lamb. There was no doubt now. Spotted Hawk's plan was to see them all dead. Swift Eagle, the girl, and the cultist he was guiding into a sacred trap. But he had underestimated the Covenant's skill. They were moving too fast. They would catch up before Swift Eagle could reach the valley entrance. He was out of time. There was nowhere left to run. "Father, what is it?" Little Flower whispered, her voice trembling. He looked down at her wide, trusting eyes. His promise to keep her safe felt like a lie. He had failed. But then he heard another sound, from the opposite direction. Hoofbeats, many of them, coming up the pass behind them. He turned, expecting to be caught in a pincer, a perfect trap. But the men who rounded the bend weren't cultists. They were blue-coated soldiers, and at their head was Captain Thorne. Thorne saw the girl, and his face was a mask of grim determination. But then his eyes flicked downwards, and he saw the Covenant trackers below. Understanding dawned on his face. He wasn't looking at a kidnapper anymore. He was looking at a man protecting his niece from their common enemy. In that single silent moment, everything changed. The lines of war were redrawn. It wasn't Comanche versus soldier anymore. It was all of them against the darkness climbing the mountain. "Get the girl to the valley," Thorne yelled, his voice echoing across the canyon. "We'll hold them off." Swift Eagle didn't need to be told twice. He scooped Little Flower onto his horse, mounted behind her, and kicked the animal into a desperate gallop. Behind them, the sounds of a battle erupted. The crack of rifles, the shouts of men, the screams of the wounded. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He raced towards the entrance of the Valley of Whispering Stones, a narrow slit in the rock face that was almost invisible until you were right upon it. The legends said the valley would protect the pure of heart. He prayed for the first time in years that the legends were true. They plunged into the darkness of the passage, the sounds of the battle fading behind them. The air inside was cold, and the walls seemed to whisper as they passed. They emerged into a place of impossible beauty, a hidden valley, lush and green, with a gentle stream running through it. Giant, wind-carved stones, the whispering stones of the legends, stood like silent sentinels. It was peaceful. It was safe. For now. He helped Little Flower down from the horse. She was shaking, her eyes wide with fear from the sounds of the fight. He held her close, trying to shield her from the violence of the world he had brought her into. "Is it over?" she asked. "I don't know, little star," he said honestly. "I don't know." They waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The echoes of the battle outside died down, replaced by an eerie silence. Who had won? Were they truly safe? Or had the monsters just found a new way in? Then a figure appeared at the valley's entrance. He was stumbling, wounded, his uniform torn and bloody. It was Captain Thorne. He was alone. "They're gone," he rasped, leaning against the rock wall for support. "Most of them, anyway. We drove them back down the mountain." He looked at Swift Eagle, a new respect in his weary eyes. "You were right to run. They fight like demons." Relief washed over Swift Eagle, but it was short-lived. "My men?" Thorne shook his head, his face etched with grief. "I lost half of them. They bought you time." The cost of their safety was measured in the lives of soldiers he had considered his enemy only hours before. The world was no longer simple. Before they could say more, another figure staggered into the valley. It was Spotted Hawk. He was gravely wounded, a deep gash in his side, his face pale from blood loss. He collapsed to his knees, his eyes finding Swift Eagle. They are not men," he choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. "They killed everyone. Soldiers, warriors who followed me. It didn't matter. They kill for the joy of it." He looked past Swift Eagle, his gaze locking on Little Flower, who was hiding behind her father's legs. The hatred was gone from his eyes, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. "I was wrong," he whispered. "The poison wasn't in her. It was in my own heart. I brought this upon us." Just as he spoke, a shadow fell over the entrance to the valley. A man stood there, taller than the others, his face a horrifying mask of scars. It was the leader of the Covenant. He wasn't dead, and he wasn't alone. 3 more of his fanatical followers stood behind him. They had survived the battle and had followed the survivors into their sanctuary. The leader's eyes, burning with a cold fire, fixed on Little Flower. "The vessel," he hissed, his voice like the slithering of a snake. "The Star Child returns to the fold. Her blood will consecrate this ground." Thorne tried to raise his pistol, but the cult leader was too fast. He threw a knife with blinding speed and the gun clattered from Thorne's hand. Swift Eagle pushed Little Flower behind him, drawing his tomahawk. It was 4 against 3, and 2 of them were badly wounded. This was the end, the final battle, fought in a sacred place that was about to be desecrated by blood. The monster took a step forward. "Give us the girl and we will grant you a quick death." Swift Eagle looked at Thorne, who was clutching his wounded arm, and at Spotted Hawk, who was barely conscious. There would be no escape. But as the cult leader lunged, something extraordinary happened. Spotted Hawk, with the last of his strength, let out a final defiant war cry. He surged to his feet and threw himself not at the leader, but at the 2 cultists behind him, tackling them with the force of a dying bull. It was a suicide move, a final act of redemption. It bought them seconds, and seconds were all they needed. In that moment of chaos, Swift Eagle and Thorne acted as one. Thorne, despite his injuries, lunged for his fallen pistol. Swift Eagle charged the cult leader, his tomahawk a blur of motion. The leader was fast, impossibly so, and he parried the blow with a wicked-looking blade of his own. The clash of steel echoed through the sacred valley. Little Flower screamed as a cultist, having shaken off Spotted Hawk, turned towards her. Spotted Hawk, bleeding out on the ground, reached out and grabbed the man's ankle, his grip like iron even in death. The cultist stumbled, giving Thorne the opening he needed. A single shot rang out, and the man fell. The last cultist, seeing his companions fall, turned and fled, disappearing back into the mountain pass like a frightened animal. Now it was just Swift Eagle and the leader. They circled each other, 2 apex predators locked in a dance of death. The leader was stronger, his movements filled with a brutal, fanatical power. But Swift Eagle was fighting for more than just his own life. He was fighting for his daughter. He was fighting for his home. He was fighting for the future. He ducked under a wild swing, his tomahawk coming up, not for a killing blow, but to hook the man's leg. The leader grunted in surprise as his balance was thrown. He stumbled backwards, right into the path of one of the giant whispering stones. His head hit the ancient rock with a sickening crack. He slid to the ground, his eyes wide with shock. And then, nothing. He was dead. Silence descended upon the valley. It was over, truly over. Spotted Hawk lay still, his face peaceful in a way Swift Eagle had never seen it before. He had died a warrior, redeeming his honor with his final breath. Swift Eagle went to Little Flower, who was huddled behind a rock, and gathered her into his arms. She was crying, not just from fear, but from the overwhelming storm of it all. He held her tight, whispering reassurances in her ear. Thorn, leaning heavily on his good arm, walked over to them. The soldier and the warrior looked at each other over the head of the golden-haired child who had brought them together. The animosity was gone, replaced by a shared, exhausted respect. "He died bravely," Thorn said, nodding toward Spotted Hawk. Swift Eagle nodded. "He died Comanche." Thorn knelt down so he was at eye level with Lily May. His face softened, the hard lines of the soldier melting away to reveal the uncle, the family she had never known. "Lily," he said gently, "it's time to go home." The moment had come, the choice. Swift Eagle's heart felt like it was being ripped from his chest. He had fought, he had run, he had killed, all to protect her. But he couldn't make this choice for her. He had to let her go if that was what she wanted. He loosened his grip on her, setting her gently on her feet between them. "Little Flower," he said, his voice thick, "this man is your mother's brother. He is your blood. He can take you to a life with your own people, a safe life." She looked at Thorn, at his kind, sad eyes. He represented a world she barely remembered, a life of soft beds and wooden houses, a life without fear, without running. Then she looked up at Swift Eagle. She looked at the man who had found her, named her, and loved her. The man who had become her father in every way that mattered. Her lower lip trembled. She took a tentative step towards Thorn, and Swift Eagle felt his world shatter. But then she stopped. She turned around and ran back into Swift Eagle's arms, burying her face in his chest, her small hands clutching his shirt as if she would never let go. "I want to stay here," she sobbed. "This is my home. You are my father." Swift Eagle wrapped his arms around her, a wave of love and relief so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. He looked at Thorn, who watched them with a mixture of heartbreak and understanding. The captain slowly nodded, a sad smile on his face. "A father is the one who raises you," he said softly, "not the one who shares your blood. I see that now." He stood up, wincing from his wounds. "I will report that my niece died with her family in the raid. The Black Star Covenant will be hunted, but no one will ever look for Lily May again. She is gone." He turned to leave, but then paused. "The world is changing, Swift Eagle. I cannot stop the tide, but I can promise you this. As long as I command the fort to the east, your band will have a friend. We will have peace." He gave one last, longing look at the girl, then turned and walked out of the valley, a lonely figure disappearing back into the world of men. Swift Eagle stood there for a long time, holding his daughter, surrounded by the silent, watchful stones of the valley. The war was over. The battle for his daughter's soul was won. He had lost friends and his people had paid a heavy price, but their family, forged in blood and fire, was whole. He looked down at Little Flower, who was finally smiling, her tears drying on her cheeks. "Let's go home, Father," she said. He smiled back. "Yes, little star," he said, lifting her into his arms. "Let's go home." They walked out of the Valley of Sanctuary, not back into the world they had left, but into a new one, a future that was uncertain and filled with challenges, but one they would face together. A Comanche warrior and his golden-haired daughter, a bridge between two worlds, their bond a testament to the fact that the strongest families aren't born. They're chosen. The story of Swift Eagle and Little Flower shows us that family isn't about the blood you share, but the love you give and the promises you keep. It's about choosing to protect someone, no matter the cost. If you were moved by their incredible journey and believe that love is the most powerful force in the world, then you've found your tribe right here. Hit that subscribe button and join our storytelling community. We share new tales of courage, sacrifice, and unbreakable bonds every week, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Comment below and let us know which part of their story hit you the hardest. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.